man, if you are watching this on YouTube, you will see that my background is exceptionally dark and creepy. Let's see if we can fix that. Hold on. Wait. I mean, then it looks a little less like I'm living in an absolute dungeon and cage, but oh my goodness. Hello and welcome to Our Stories, Our Pride. I am so happy to be here with you. For those of you that were maybe meeting for the first time, my name is Kelsey, but you can absolutely call me Kels. I am a queer Filipino-Canadian living here on Treaty 7 territory in the city of Lethbridge, Alberta, and I've been on a whole journey of talking to queer people and hearing our stories and sharing them on my own podcast, Queer in Alberta. So that's a bit of a, background, an introduction to me. I am so excited to be your guest host for Our Stories, Our Pride, and I do have to mention that It Gets Better Canada is just so proud to present this episode and this series, and that it would not be made possible without the financial support of the Canadian Red Cross and the Public Health Agency of Canada. So massive shout out to everybody involved in making this happen and getting me here. If you are not familiar with It Gets Better Canada, it is a national charity, and it envisions a day when no young person in Canada feels marginalized, isolated, or rejected based on their sexual identity, sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. Through the power of storytelling and community engagement, It Gets Better Canada works to uplift and empower 2S LGBTQ+ youth all across the country. Now, if this just sounds like amazing stuff that you really want to get more involved in, you can actually learn more about the organization's campaigns and latest initiatives and how you can support through the power of your donations if you visit itgetsbettercanada.org. All that fun stuff out of the way, we can really just get into this episode and series today. Our Stories, Our Pride gave me the opportunity to talk to 3 different individuals, 2 experts and 1 queer youth, about their experiences and insights on everything that we kind of experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic. I know that even just for myself, those were a really rough and tumultuous few years. I was in grad school during COVID, which for anybody that's thinking about doing something similar, I would not recommend starting graduate studies during a global pandemic. It was not the vibe. But what can you expect from this series? You're going to hear in this episode today, episode 1, from Heather Rowland. She is a licensed therapist and counselor who practices here in the city of Lethbridge. I've known her for many years as an incredibly warm and insightful person. We actually curated essentially a queer mental health wellness toolkit that can give you the tools to navigate anxiety or uncertainty, whether it's a pandemic that you're facing or something else in your day-to-day life. But without further ado, I am so excited to share with you this first episode of Our Stories, Our Pride, featuring Heather Rowland.
Hi, yes, I'm Heather, Heather Rowland. I'll just jump in and introduce myself. Yeah, I am here in Lethbridge as well, a parent of 2 quite young queer kids. My oldest is about to turn 11 and my youngest is 8. And I'm also a clinical social worker, so I work a lot with mental health and wellness, and I'm a yoga teacher. Sometimes I'm an instructor, so I just kind of bounce between different places.
It's so fun to bring Heather onto this episode because for those of you who are new to the series, we got to work together with your little one to talk about coming out as trans and gender fluid at a super young age here in Lethbridge.
Austin is the youngest and has been gender non-conforming since forever. They just knew, and they had the space to know. And then my oldest child is a lot more private than Paxton, but she's at a space now where she's very comfortable in her sexual identity as it's kind of growing, and she's getting older, and she's very proudly yesterday had a shirt that said "Bi is not a phase." Yeah, so it's been a really cool journey just as a parent.
With this COVID toolkit, essentially, that we're building with It Gets Better Canada and the Canadian Red Cross, we're really going to focus on mental health and self-care in this conversation. COVID was a real tester for how do I maintain good self-care.
Yes, absolutely. my partner and I and like our family came at COVID from pretty privileged position because we're both old enough and long enough in our careers that we were able to flex hours. If I couldn't have done that, like, oh my, like, there's just no way. I would have been so overwhelmed.
You would have been me.
Yes. COVID was a thing, you know, and watching my kids, it was definitely like really hard just to honor their different ways of being. My oldest is quite a competitive, focused, scattered brained kind of human in a good way. She's very sparkly, which I love. But like with no sports, that's her outlet. I don't understand sports. It's not mine, but for her, it's like really vital to her mental health, or she self-combusts. So it was like, oh, we can't do that. What are we gonna do instead? You know? So it was hard. Like something that really stood out for me is around who, like, because for a while you had to choose families that you were allowed to interact with.
It's so crazy to reflect on now. Like we were so in it that it became normal, even though it was bizarre.
Such a surreal thing to look back on and be like, this is weird. And it was hard.
Yeah, and I think that point of being surreal is just the absolute best word for it, because we were in that kind of space for so long, like 2.5 years, and now as we're supposedly moving out of it, it's still just strange to even reflect on. When we think about ways we've changed in terms of our own personalities, I think it took a long time for me to redevelop my social battery and my ability to interact with people in such a full-on present capacity, because everything was like this.
Yes, absolutely. And I think in some ways, you know, in the kind of wellness world, some things were really deconstructed around wellness. Like we can do virtual counseling, and that looks like it's staying. Virtual gym classes, personal training. I know like a lot of queer organizations all of a sudden became accessible to my family because of COVID, because Lethbridge is pretty small. So having things online is very helpful. So there was like that, and I get really excited that we can access things. But also it's like, oh gosh, real people, like there's too much stimulation. I'm tracking their whole body, you know? Yeah,
I think it's really so funny bizarre that you named that, because for me, I've just been thinking, is this just a part of being in my later 20s where I'm so much more easily overstimulated than I was before? Do I just want to be in bed at 10 p.m.? But I wonder if it has to do something with that hyper intense experience that we all collectively went through.
Yeah, I think absolutely it does.
Big knock on wood that this doesn't happen again in the near or immediate future. But if we are going through really tumultuous or stressful periods of time like that, how are some of the ways that we can take care of ourselves with maybe some of the lessons we've learned from COVID?
Yes, I think, you know, what we see in the research from like the queer community itself, as well as what I see as a clinician and as a parent, I think there's some things that are really clear. So things that I think people wanted to minimize, or just you can't deny them anymore. So basic things for mental health, like are structural. You know, we can't control if COVID happens again, but looking at those structural pieces, like we know affirmation is important. We know safe community is important. We know feeling belonging is important. So when I think about like mental wellness and toolkits, it's like, okay, we need to keep advocating for our systems to make sure those happen, so that we're not basically creating a structure that queer people can't thrive in and then telling them to work harder at their self-care.
There it
right?
is.
It's like, let's just name that. For me, it's really important because a lot of the things that we know help improve mental wellness are things like community and belonging. You know, when I think about my younger human, they, you know, immediately if they have a bad day at school, it very quickly turns around. Like say someone said this was a kind of an ironic comment to me, but a few weeks ago, someone said, "Bays can't wear dresses." And I was like, we got the pronoun.
One step forward, 3 steps back. That's
I was
interesting,
like,
actually.
It is. I was like, I don't know what to do with this. But almost immediately we're like, okay, what does affirmation or community and belonging look like? Because the comment is isolating, right? It's not a great comment for my 8-year-old to have to figure out. But more often than not, the comment switched to is, well, like, who in your life knows that they can totally wear dresses? Anybody can wear dresses.
Mm-hmm.
And then right away, we're switching something that they could ruminate on for quite a long time to something around connecting and belonging in community. Well, my best friend totally told that person that, of course, theys can wear dresses.
So important for kids to have that representation so that we can understand that, for example, theys can wear dresses. It is not groundbreaking, but that also they have those structures to be able to feel supported in real time as well if something does come up. If we take it even smaller in, say, a time like COVID when you're very much isolated and away from those structures, what are some ways that we can build a self-care toolkit just as individual people?
I think when I was thinking about this, I kind of broke it down to different areas or different themes more than like defined things, because everyone's so different. You know, for me, I am deeply introverted. So this surprised me a little bit because I'm like, oh, I don't have to go extrovert with people during COVID. But then I was with my family 24 hours a day, and small kids do not really do introverted activities.
No, very 0 to 100.
It is, right? So for me, I was really surprised. I'm like, why am I like just struggling? And I was like, oh, I've not had any time just to like be completely alone. Which was kind of a strange thing to have happen during COVID when so many people were isolated. But for me, I'm like, I need to just go somewhere. COVID was really easy to spiral in bad internet things. Yeah.
I feel that. And I even just like, what I realized is I've always used journaling as like a way to cope and process my thoughts. But because I had so much time just by myself, it hit a point where I was like, I'm feeling worse because I'm just journaling and journaling about all of this and have no other outlet because of these bizarre circumstances.
Oh, 100%. Like, and it's so easy. We have all this time to be self-reflective, which sounds like a good thing. But then we're
But if
just
you go
like,
too far.
yeah, then we're drowning either in our own kind of spiral, or we spent like a little too much time looking at all the bad things on the internet. I think for anyone's toolkit, it's like being really mindful about what you're consuming, whether it's within your own self-feeding cycle or like whether it's on the net or whatever it is, you know. And I had to have some really firm conversations with myself.
Yeah, and it feels hopeless at that point, right? Like whatever the issue is or the stressor, it becomes really, really big when we just hyperfixate on it like that. And it erases all of the good that might rise up to counter whatever this bad thing is.
100. I'm so glad you said that, because that is so true. So I think part of the toolkit is including things like gratitude journaling, which can feel like a real superficial challenge on a bad day.
You don't want to be grateful. Yeah.
You really don't. Yes, absolutely. But it is like letting yourself reconfigure. I think at one point, you know, I think I was feeling quite hopeless. I spent too much time circling, and a lot of my processing is through really bad poetry and really bad art. So I just drew a picture of like all the things that brought me hope. Our new neighbors that moved in, as soon as they heard, you know, I think at that time my 6-year-old go, oh, my pronouns are they, them, because they were at that time. Yeah. The next day they put out a pride sign on their door. And I was like, oh, yeah.
And you know, there's already been so many things that I just want to recognize and applaud you for and bringing up in this conversation and bringing to the space. I love that you pointed out a toolkit. There's no one size fits all. That's something that I actually recently said myself at a presentation with the Canadian Museums Association on diversity. It's that when you think of a toolkit, you're bringing in tools or strategies that you're curating to whatever situation. It's not going to be something that stays stagnant or the same. It's always going to be changing and evolving.
Yes, I love that. And it's so true because we change and evolve, right?
Mhm.
Um, I think, another thing I was thinking a lot about was how do we affirm ourselves
Mhm.
and our sexuality or our identity when we're in isolation?
Yeah, and this is perfect that you're bringing this up because that was going to be the next thing I asked you about. When we
Yeah.
talk about affirming care, what does that statement mean?
I mean, I think for me, it looks like a lot of things. So systemically, it
Mhm.
looks like me, I'm on a lot of therapist Facebook group things. It looks like me going, no, you can't say that. No, this is like incredibly like inappropriate. It looks like me saying, okay, if you're a therapist in you're working with people, that means you will be working with queer people. Like, go do your training. Here's a training. So for me, that is part of affirming care. So like people can go and actually seek mental health support and not feel like that was a horrific experience, because I know that that happens.
Yeah.
Um,
So if I'm understanding you, Heather, it's like even if you're not a part of the community, say in a
yes.
therapist capacity, that you take the responsibility to educate yourself, grow that toolkit that we're talking about, and then be able to do what you can to be an affirming space for somebody who might have a different lived experience.
100%. And I think, for me, I push that even further and advocating within the education centers, like the
Yeah.
universities that are teaching therapists. Why is this not core curriculum? Because this is not a niche market. This is like, if you work with people, you will work with queer people. So there's that kind of affirming care. Um, but then also, like, how do we make sure we affirm ourselves when we don't have access to some of these other resources because they're not there
Huge
yet?
question.
Right. So for me, I think it's kind of sweet. And again, this comes more from a parent, but you know, if someone has made a comment about they's not wearing dresses, the first thing we did is we went out and we bought 3 dresses.
Yes! I hope I didn't blow your eardrums, but this
Yes.
is the exact response I wanted.
Yes. Like we went in, we went in. I'm like, well, like, I'm like, well, buddy, what do you want to wear? And they're like, I love this one, and it's bright and it's floral and it's very them. And so I'm like, yeah, let's buy it. You can buy it. It's on sale. I can afford it.
Credit card. Boom.
Yeah. It's like, here we are. Um, so it's just watching them be affirmed in my house. They're just like spinning and twirling, and they're talking about the colors, and and I can just see them move from kind of like hesitant to like just pure joy.
There we are.
Um,
Yeah.
and I'm like, what's good for your mental health? Affirming yourself. Like no one else in that moment saw them in the dress. It was just them experiencing an affirmation of how they wanted to express and who they are. And it like, I just feel so lucky as a parent that I get to witness that moment. Like, I'm like, oh, that's so clear. Like this feels so good because they are radiating. I want to give them all the tools that they can have,
Yeah.
so that they know, like, whatever happens, like they have worth in a dress. One thing that COVID was helpful for some people is I know a lot of people who started more in the trans community who started transitioning at the start of COVID.
Yeah. This happened
And
for a lot of people.
yeah, and there was space there to really reflect on, like, what does that look like for me? How am I affirming myself? No one can see me, but like, do I feel better in a binder? Yes, I do. Okay, great. So people really had a chance to kind of explore and really settle into who they are and own it, and just be so authentically themselves. When I think about the work you've done, it is accessing celebration and joy,
Mm.
like a lot of the work, right? Yeah. And I think that is part of the toolkit, is like, how do we access celebration and joy? So it can be looking at the things that you create. Like, I would say that's a good example. It's loving, it's grounded.
I'm
Um,
blushing.
but it is. And And it's like, well, how do I make sure I create space for that, even in really hard times where it kind of seems like the world's a little bit of a dumpster fire? We get to celebrate things. We get to share love. There's something really powerful about joy.
And I think that really is touching on your own individual agency as a person and what
Yes.
you can control in an environment or a situation, whether it's COVID or something really stressful in your life that feels like it's bigger than your own control. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
I don't know if I told you this, Heather, but I just moved. I was in a community here in Lethbridge that was pretty intense suburbia, houses all together.
Yeah.
But now I'm in a different space in the city that's very open and green, and I have a balcony. And I've noticed that even on days that I am stressed and tired, if I step out onto that balcony for 5 seconds, I just feel so much better. And that's like
Yes.
a huge privilege because some people, like in my old place, it was not a possibility. You didn't want to go outside. But yeah, being able to make room and time for things that
Yes.
really restore your soul. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And it's powerful. It's funny you say that. Like, this is just my counseling brain kind of geeking out. But there's research to show that when we can see like a horizon in distance, actually things in our parasympathetic nervous system, like our calming system, click on.
Yeah.
And we're like, so it actually is like measurable.
It's cool.
It's so cool. Neuroscience is cool for a lot of things, but it's like, that's practical. Like, I'm just going to go, look out my window or whatever. Even my office here, I'm just looking out a window and like there's a building across the street, but it's a little bit of a distance. So even then, like quite often I'll come out and just be like, so that's part of my toolkit too.
We're in Lethbridge. We're lucky to have access to green spaces and parks, and it's relatively easy to get from point A to point B. But if, say, somebody is watching this in Toronto or something, a very big urban jungle, how can you still get that, I guess, way of taking care of yourself outside?
Yes, I think it's like choosing which spaces within your environment are accessible to you. So, I used to live in Brisbane in Australia, and one of my favorite things, one of my favorite things, even though there's lots of a skyline, I'd have to drive to get to more spacious areas because I live downtown. But one of the things that was just a nourishing space for my system was just all the white noise sitting at a coffee shop because everything is outside there. So just sitting on a coffee shop and just having the white noise kind of go by and people watch. That was something I found for some reason did the same thing for my brain. I don't know why.
I so get that though.
Yeah.
It's like a reminder that there is more going on than whatever is happening inside of your head or whatever is going on with your body. There's more than just you.
Yes, I think that's exactly what it is. So, yeah.
And I think that's really important that you brought that up because I feel like, and you tell me as the expert, so many of us have therapized our language in many ways, and we're constantly looking up wellness and ways that we can take care of ourselves, that it's almost like this feeling of, I have all of these resources, why am I still having a bad day? But that's just a part of being human. So knowing that if COVID happens again or something else, you're going to have bad days no matter how great you are at being introspective.
And I think we have to sometimes, and this is such a cliche, but I am a believer that like sometimes we have to go through the grief or the rage or whatever it is, and then we need to integrate that. Valerie Carr is an activist out of the States that I really appreciate, and she talks a lot about like the pause before the push. And I think that's really essential for our wellness as well, especially in times of COVID. It's like, okay, like I'm going to feel the rage. I'm going to feel the grief by whatever might be going on. I'm going to pause and then I can push again.
We've got a bit of a toolkit between the two of us now in this one conversation. I'm quite impressed.
Yay!
Heather, thank you so much. It's always beyond a pleasure to chat with you.
You as well. Thank you. I'm just really grateful for what you're doing in this and the space. So thank you.
Every time I get all blushy on camera. I am just so lucky to have you in my life, and I'm so glad that I got to have you come on to this new show with It Gets Better Canada.
Oh, thank you so much. It's lovely.
Thank you so much for tuning in and watching episode 1 of Our Stories, Our Pride. I hope that you found that conversation with Heather as enlightening as I did. Once again, I would love to give a massive shout out to the Canadian Red Cross as well as the Public Health Agency of Canada. Without them, this episode would not have been possible, nor would this fantastic series. If you are wanting to follow along with all things It Gets Better Canada, besties, they are all over social media. I believe on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, you name it, they are there, and they are clearing up the narrative for queer youth here in Canada today. If you also want to follow along or donate, remember to go to itgetsbettercanada.org. You better stick around for episode 2 because, honey, it is going to be amazing. Stay loud and stay proud, Canada. Mwah.